King, ruler, monarch. These are the things Rex means in the ancient Latin tongue. It's where Tyrannosaurus gets its name, king of the tyrant lizards. Royalty is often associated with elegance, nobility, and grace. We were told the Rex Alliance Pilot Escort was the most beautiful ship ever added to the game. So imagine my surprise when it turned out to be a total uggo. It's the Nepo baby from hell. Seriously, I loved Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but the Defiant and the Jem'Hadar attack ship are two of the ugliest ships I've ever seen. So mashing them together into a Frankenstein's monster just didn't turn out very well, at least in my opinion. Thankfully, there's a lot more to a ship than just how it looks. And as we'll see, if you strip it for parts, there's a lot of gold to be found here. But first, let's talk about the ship's stats. The console layout only has 2 for engineering and 5 for tactical, leaving you pretty much forced to use locators and/or exploiters. The bridge officer seating is pretty good, but nothing too spectacular. You get a lieutenant commander engineering/pilot seat, which is very difficult to find any way to make use of the pilot seating, and a lieutenant tactical/miracle worker seat, where you can just barely fit a couple of usable miracle worker powers on there. The lieutenant commander universal seat gives it a lot of flexibility if you want to do more uncon procs or have a gravity well, for example, which is what I did. So while it isn't going to win any awards, it is nice that it has 2 different specialization seats, and you should be able to put something usable on it. Let's talk about the accessory package. The Elite Alliance Squadron Beacon, which has passives of 8% crit severity and a small speed bonus. Keep that in the back of your mind, it's going to be important later. The clicky calls in 4 ships from the 4 different factions, or at least I think that's what it's supposed to do, but it seems to be bugged right now, and they aren't all labeled correctly. They do something similar to call emergency artillery. It can do a surprising amount of damage if you're able to use it correctly. The trait Inertial Supremacy is just outright good with no downsides, and one of the better event traits we've ever gotten. Using AoE firing modes will add a damage resistance debuff to your weapons based on your current speed, going up to -50 at 240 speed. This is quite potent and extremely useful. My favorite inclusion, however, is the new experimental weapon, the Inertial Polaron Shunt. This weapon does Polaron-based damage, and it's buffed by Polaron buffs, weapon power, and it also gains firing cycle haste based on your current flight speed. Because there are so many different ways to buff it, I wanted to see how far I could push it, so I looked for a ship that would allow me to do the most with it that isn't the Rex. I settled on the Fleet Saber, which allowed me to use 7 Polaron ISO mags while still having an experimental weapon slot. I added in a few sweeteners like the Fulcrum Shift Personal Space trait and the Thirst for Battle Starship trait from the legendary Bortesque to help give it a bit more juice. In an ISC Pug run, I ended up getting 55k DPS out of it from a total of 320k DPS, which is pretty significant. It's Polaron based and it needs a little babying, so it's not going to take the top spot for experimental weapons, but it's interesting, it's fun, it's powerful, and it encouraged me to get out there and do a custom build. If you're interested in Polaron builds, I would almost consider this a must-have. The total package is quite thematic. On the one hand, it receives from the Jem'Hadar half the Jem'Hadar Vanguard Wingman in the form of 2 other Rex Pilot Alliance Escorts, which follow you around and help do damage for you, along with using Polaron-based energy weapons such as the aforementioned experimental weapon. And on the Defiant side of things, its trait benefits from using an AoE firing mode, and the original Tier 6 Defiant is one of the ships that gives out Withering Barrage, which is the extender trait for Cannon Scatter Volley. This is especially convenient right now as Cryptic will soon be running the Klingon event recruitment campaign again, which will allow you to get a Klingon recruit. That Klingon recruit, after doing a mission, can unlock the Machala Bird of Prey refit for your entire account, which will allow you to get the Withering Barrage trait for free. It also has a consistent theme of speed. Despite not being a full pilot ship, it does come with pilot maneuvers and does have a lieutenant commander pilot seat, which is associated with speed. The console does give a speed bonus as part of its passives, and both the trait and experimental weapon benefit directly from your flight speed stat. Overall, it's a very cohesive and well-designed ship that's very thematic from start to finish. It's also quite powerful as well. It's not the best ship in the game or anything like that, but the trait, the console, and the experimental weapon are all very strong, and it's one of the better event ships we've seen. It's not quite as FOMO worthy as something like the Soliton Wave Impeller, but it's absolutely worth picking up if you have the time. If they were to just put this in the C-store directly, I would still recommend picking it up. The only real downside for me is the appearance, but as they say, there's no accounting for taste.